Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. I'd like to welcome you, dear viewers, to another in our series, Understanding the Qur'an. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We continue in this segment of our series to look at Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th chapter of the Qur'an, known as the chapter of the cave. And we are continuing with verse 61 with the story of Prophet Musa and Khidr. And in our previous verses, we had a basic background as to the incident which is presented in the Qur'an, because the incident is presented in the Qur'an without background. And this is not uncommon for many of the stories of the Qur'an, where Allah leaves out a lot of the details one may find, for example, in reading a storybook, or if one read the Bible. You know, when you compare the stories between the Qur'an and the Bible, oftentimes, people compare the two and just Quranic stories just taken out of the Bible and only, but it wasn't taken complete. There are things missing and so on. But actually, if one goes and looks at the two stories, for example, the story of Prophet Yusuf, this story of Musa and Khidr is not mentioned at all anywhere in the Bible. The story of Yusuf, alayhi salam, if we compare that story in the Bible with the story in the Qur'an, the difference is the story in the Qur'an is maybe about a fifth in length of the one in the Bible. The one in the Bible has a lot of detail. If you read it, you've got a complete, the houses they lived in, the type of, doors they had, and the, names of this one and that one, and the son of this one, and the cousins and the uncles, and all the details are there. But the spiritual message, if one reads it, you can hardly find it. It's lost in detail. Whereas when you read it in the Qur'an, the story of Prophet Yusuf, the essence is there. The essence of the trust of his father in Allah, the trials of the brothers, the trials that Prophet Yusuf went through. Prophet Joseph in prison, when he was thrown in the well, all the different circumstances that he went through. And the essence, the essential messages are very clear there. This is the difference. You find that though the Quranic stories, which you may find similar in the Bible, lack much of the detail, what you see is that it focuses on the essence of the message, the wisdom that is to be gained from the message, the spiritual lesson to be learned. So similarly, we find with this story of Prophet Musa and Al-Khidr that the fine details, or more of the details, were provided by the Prophet, may God's peace and blessing be upon him, in his own explanations and commentary on the story. And we said that really what started this story going was that on one occasion, Prophet Musa had given a lecture or a sermon, and he was asked after it who was the most knowledgeable person around, and he said it was himself, believing that he was the one receiving revelation, that, he probably has the most knowledge. But then Allah informed him that he wasn't the most knowledgeable, to bring him down a few notches. And he told him, there is another servant of mine who's more knowledgeable. And it would have been better for him to have said, Allah knows best, So of course, when he was told about somebody else having more knowledge, Prophet Musa immediately, in his desire to have more knowledge, to gain more knowledge, which is divine knowledge, he asked Allah how could he gain this knowledge, how to meet this person. So Allah gave him instructions as to what to do. From verse 61, Prophet Musa's quest for knowledge is described. Allah says there,
فلما بلغا مجمع بينهما نسيا حوتهما فاتخذ سبيله في البحر سربا.
But when they reached the junction of the two seas, they forgot their fish, and it tunneled its way through the sea. When Prophet Muhammad ﷺ began to describe this story, he said that when Prophet Musa had asked Allah how he could meet the man who had this greater knowledge, Allah told him, take a fish and put it in a large basket, and you will find him at the place where you lose the fish. So Prophet Musa took a fish, put it in a large basket as he was instructed, and set out along with his servant boy, Yusha ibn Nun. And when they reached a large rock which was near the bank of the sea, they rested there. At this point, while they were sleeping, something happened. The base of the rock on which they were sleeping had a spring. And this spring, according to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, was called the spring of life. It was called that because anything which was dead, which became touched by its water, came back to life. So when the servant boy, Yusha, had put down the basket with the fish and they lay on the rock, some water from the spring was carried by the wind to the basket, and droplets fell on the fish. And the fish came back to life. And it started wriggling inside of its basket, knocked over the basket, and then it started wriggling down on the shoreline towards the water. At this point, the young servant boy woke up and he noticed the fish wriggling down the bank of the sea, or the shore line, into the water and then swimming off into the water. And Allah caused it, as it swam through the water, He caused the water not to close behind it, so it appeared as if the fish were swimming in a tunnel through the water. So this is what is being described there in verse 61. It tunneled its way through the sea. In verse 62, Allah goes on to relay the story. He says,
فلما جاوزا قال لفتاه آتنا غداءنا لقد لقينا من سفرنا هذا نصبا.
So when they had gone beyond that place, Moses said to his boy servant, "Bring us our lunch. Indeed, we have suffered much fatigue in this journey of ours." Allah goes on to describe the journey. It seems that after the servant boy had seen the fish work its way into the sea, Prophet Musa was asleep, so he didn't disturb him. He went back to sleep himself. Then they got up and set back out on the journey. So after they had traveled, this is what Prophet Muhammad ﷺ explained, after they had traveled for the rest of the night and a part of the next day, Prophet Moses said to his servant, "Bring us our food, because we have really become quite tired from this long journey of ours." And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that Moses didn't feel tired until after he had passed the place where he was really supposed to meet Al-Khidr. He left and had gone a day's journey, day and a night, or a night and part of a day's journey. Beyond that point, before tiredness hit him, and now the issue of the fish was going to bring the rest of the story into focus. In verse 63, Allah goes on to say,
قال أرأيت إذ أوينا إلى الصخرة فإني نسيت الحوت وما أنسانيه إلا الشيطان أن أذكره واتخذ سبيله في البحر عجبا.
He replied, "Do you remember when we took shelter at the rock? Most certainly I forgot the fish there. It was only Satan who caused me to forget to mention it, and it took an amazing path into the sea."
فلما جاوزا قال لفتاه آتنا غداءنا لقد لقينا من سفرنا هذا نصبا.
So when they had gone beyond that place, Moses said to his boy servant, "Bring us our lunch. Indeed, we have suffered much fatigue in this journey of ours." Allah goes on to describe the journey. It seems that after the servant boy had seen the fish work its way into the sea, Prophet Musa was asleep, so he didn't disturb him. He went back to sleep himself. Then they got up and set back out on the journey. So after they had traveled, this is what Prophet Muhammad ﷺ explained, after they had traveled for the rest of the night and a part of the next day, Prophet Moses said to his servant, "Bring us our food, because we have really become quite tired from this long journey of ours." And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that Moses didn't feel tired until after he had passed the place where he was really supposed to meet Al-Khidr. He left and had gone a day's journey, day and a night, or a night and part of a day's journey. Beyond that point, before tiredness hit him, and now the issue of the fish was going to bring the rest of the story into focus. In verse 63, Allah goes on to say,
قال أرأيت إذ أوينا إلى الصخرة فإني نسيت الحوت وما أنسانيه إلا الشيطان أن أذكره واتخذ سبيله في البحر عجبا.
He replied, "Do you remember when we took shelter at the rock? Most certainly I forgot the fish there. It was only Satan who caused me to forget to mention it, and it took an amazing path into the sea." Prophet Muhammad ﷺ went on to explain what was taking place. That in fact, Yusha, that's the name of the servant boy, had gone back to sleep, and when they had awoken, he had forgotten to relay this information to Prophet Musa. So they set off on the journey. And he mentioned here that it was only Satan who caused him to forget. And this is a reference to the role of Satan in confusion in human lives, that he does have the power to create some forgetfulness amongst human beings through distraction and a variety of other ways. But we find in a number of incidents, for example, when Prophet Adam ate from the tree, he had been caused to forget Allah's command. Satan had beguiled him, had offered him so much attraction that he forgot Allah's command and disobeyed Allah. This forgetfulness, and this is why this reference is made. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, had told us, for example, in the case of the remembering of the Qur'an, that one shouldn't say, "I forgot the Qur'an," but should say, "Satan caused me to forget it." The Qur'an that we memorize many times, when we try to learn it and we forget it from time to time, we should say, Satan caused us to forget it, because it is something that we want to keep. We all have the desire to want to learn and to hold as much of the Qur'an as possible. But it requires revision and these kind of things, and there are forces at work to cause us to be distracted from it, so that we don't finish what we need to do to maintain and to keep whatever Qur'an we learned. Anyway, in the next verse, in verse 64, Allah continues to relay the story. He says there,
قال ذلك ما كنا نبغي فارتدا على آثارهما قصصا.
Moses exclaimed, "That's what we have been seeking." So they returned by retracing their footsteps. Prophet Musa here, realizing that the incident that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told him about, that he would meet Khidr at the place, at the junction of the two seas, this was to be the incident which would show him that. He didn't know specifically, because what was told to him, it was that where he would lose the fish, but exactly where he would know afterwards when the fish was lost. So this was the sign for him, as Allah informed him, to let him know where was the spot to meet Al-Khidr, the person who had greater knowledge than himself. So he exclaimed, "That's what we'll be looking for. That's what I'm looking for." So they immediately retraced their footsteps and went back to the rock. Verse 65, Allah continues what happened when they reached the rock.
فوجدا عبدا من عبادنا آتيناه رحمة من عندنا وعلمناه من لدنا علما.
Then they found one of my servants, on whom I had conferred divine mercy, and whom I had taught divine knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ went on to explain that when they reached there, they found a man lying down, covered with a garment near the rock. Prophet Musa greeted him, and he replied to his greeting. That is, he said, "Salaam alaikum," and he replied, "Wa alaikum salam." And he asked, "How do people greet each other in your land?" And Prophet Musa replied that this was the way. And he explained to him, "I am Moses." The man asked, "Moses of the children of Israel?" And Moses replied, "Yes, I have come to you so that you may teach me from those things which Allah has taught you." And he replied, "O Moses, I have some of the knowledge of Allah which Allah has taught me, and which you do not know, while you have some of the knowledge of Allah which Allah has taught you, and which I don't know." In this, we can see Allah indicating that this individual's knowledge, though it was superior to Prophet Musa, it was superior in certain areas. Not necessarily that all of his knowledge was superior to all of Prophet Musa's knowledge. Allah had given Prophet Musa knowledge which he hadn't given this man also. And this was Allah informing through the individual who he has met here that this is what the situation was. It's just that Prophet Musa's knowledge did not encompass all of the knowledge which was there. But in certain areas he had superior knowledge. Now, this was the beginning now of the relationship between Prophet Musa and this individual who came to be known as, actually the term in Arabic is Khadir, but in common usage he is referred to as Khidr. And he was referred to by this name because of the fact that, or it is said that because of the fact that when he sat on certain things, it caused them to turn green. He had sat on some dried grass or whatever, and by Allah's will, as a miracle, it became green. So it became known by this name, because it comes from the Arabic word, Akthar, which means green. Anyway, the point is that this individual, Khadir or Khidr, he informed Prophet Musa that their knowledge was similar, but though he had special knowledge which Prophet Musa didn't have, likewise Prophet Musa had knowledge which he didn't have. And in the next verse, Prophet Musa continues to make now his request to gain knowledge from Al-Khidr. Allah says there, quoting Prophet Musa,
قال له موسى هل أتبعك على أن تعلمني مما علمت رشدا قال إنما إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا وكيف تصبر على ما لم تحط به خبرا قال ستجدني إن شاء الله صابرا ولا أعصي لك أمرا قال فإن اتبعتني فلا تسألني عن شيء حتى أحدث لك منه ذكرا.
Moses asked him, "May I accompany you so that you can teach me some of what you have been taught?" He replied, "Certainly, you won't be able to have patience with me. And how can you have patience with something you don't understand?" Moses said, "You will find me patient if Allah wills, and I won't disobey any of your instructions." He said, "In that case, if you accompany me, don't ask me about anything until I mention it to you myself." Here Allah describes the conversation which takes place between Musa and Khidr. Here Prophet Musa is asking him to accompany him on his journey in order to gain knowledge from him. And Al-Khidr is informing him that the knowledge which he has will cause him to do certain things which Prophet Musa will not be patient with. He will not be able to be patient with it, not because he was fundamentally an impatient person, but because he wouldn't have the sufficient understanding behind it to allow him to be patient. But Prophet Musa assured him, "No, you will find me patient." Knowing that this is what is in front of him, he informed him that he would be patient in whatever matters. And Al-Khidr made the stipulation, "Okay, if you accompany me on this journey, then don't ask me anything about what I do until I explain it to you. I will explain it, but just don't ask anything whilst we are proceeding in the journey." With that, dear viewers, we're stopping here and we'll continue with the journey of Prophet Musa and Khidr together. And we hope that you'll continue to follow our program as Allah continues to educate us in this, the 18th chapter of the Qur'an, Surah Al-Kahf. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.